I'm Brian with BibleStudying.net, and we left off saying that in this video segment we were going to be talking about Islam. Now we're going to set aside Islam in large part for another study because there's many facets and comparisons that need to be made there. And I want to start off by saying that Islam is not a religion that we can throw into the global sort of pantheistic, polytheistic mysticism that we've seen in other religions like Hinduism and Buddhism and Gnosticism and Platonism, and we'll talk more about why later. But we've been throwing those basically into that category, and you can't really do that with Islam. But we do want to look, although we're going to set aside Islam for its own video series, at some important historical facts concerning Islam here, and we can sort of plot it on our map and on a timeline. According to Britannica, Muhammad, who's the founder of Islam, dies on June 8, 632 AD, so he's a 7th century figure. He's the founder of the religion of Islam and of the Muslim community. And what else do we know about the writing down of the documents, the historical documents for Islam? Well, of course, as you know, the documents for Islam are largely the Quran, although they also have the Hadith. The Quran is the sacred scripture. The Hadith is sort of the stories about the Prophet Muhammad's life. So what do we know about that? Well, according to Britannica.com, the Quran, after the Prophet's death, and especially after the Battle of Yamama in 633, a great number of those who knew the Quran by heart had fallen. They were killed, and fear arose that the knowledge of the Quran might disappear. So it was decided to collect the revelations from all the available written sources, as Muslim tradition has it, from the hearts and memories of the people. And so what they do is they write it down at this point in time, around 633 AD or thereafter. At least this is the non-critical look at Muslim history and the Quran. That's what they say is the time frame for it. And then as we read a little farther here, it says that so that there would be no doubt about the correct reading of the Quran, the Caliph Uthman in 644 and 656, that's when he reigned, is reported to have commissioned a particular individual named Zayd ibn Thabit and other men. And so what did they do? They basically consulted, and then they sort of put together an authoritative version of the Quran at that point. And so again, this is very much just 7th century, very close proximity to the Prophet's life in that sense, just in terms of historical documentation, on very good standing. What else can we say about the Quran? Well, let's talk about its comparison to other religions, and what does it have to say in terms of source material. So we've already looked at how some of the source material for Muhammad was said to have been written down at around the same century, just like Jesus Christ, around the same century as the Prophet himself lived. But what else do we know about it? Well, Islam affirms the reliability and the divine origin, not just the reliability, but the divine origin of the Jewish and Christian historical documents, the Jewish and Christian scriptures. So this is important because when we say, well, whose scriptures is right? You know, is it Judaism, is it Christianity, is it Islam? It's important to know that Islam already affirms the correctness and the divine origin of both the Old and New Testament itself. And now I'm going to read some passages from the Quran itself here in the next segment. So, according to the Quran, as Muhammad is supposed to be sort of speaking the Quran, is supposed to be the words of God directly. This segment says, "Are they seeking a religion other than God's? When every soul in heavens and earth has submitted to him willingly or by compulsion, to him they say, return. Say, we believe in God and what is revealed to us. In that which is revealed to Abraham and to Ishmael, to Isaac and Jacob and the tribes, and that which the Lord, their Lord, gave Moses and Jesus and the prophets, we discriminate against none of them." So according to Islam, according to the Quran itself, they don't discriminate against any of the revelations of God given to the Jews or the Christians, Moses and Jesus and the prophets, as it says here. According to the next passage in the Quran, it says, "The apostle believes in what has been revealed to him by his Lord, and so do the faithful. They all believe in God, his angels, his scriptures, and his apostles. We discriminate against none of his apostles." So what scriptures did they have when Muhammad said this, when Muhammad made this statement? Well, the only scriptures in existence were the Old Testament, New Testament in particular. And so they're saying they don't discriminate. They believe in all of those scriptures. Lastly here, another quote from the Quran says, "Say, people of the book, you will attain nothing until you observe the Torah and the gospel, and that which has been revealed to you from your Lord." So he's actually instructing people to observe the Torah and the gospel, and that they can't attain anything until they first obey what's written in those scriptures, in those historical documents. And the reason we're going to have to cover Islam in a separate study is because there are many, many quotes. We're not just going in here and handpicking a few select quotes from the Quran. we went through, we read the Quran, we categorized all of its statements, and you can see that there are just streams and themes throughout the Quran that need to be addressed. There's a mountain of evidence concerning various technical issues within the Quran. But these are just some highlights here showing that the Quran affirms the reliability of both the Old and the New Testament. In addition, we can ask the question about what kind of historical corroboration that is offered by Islam. Why should you believe Islam? Now, if you read the Quran, what you find is effectively there is no reason offered. You were just told to believe. You're threatened with damnation, of course, if you don't believe, but there's no reason offered other than appealing to Muhammad as the last in the line of apostles, who includes Old Testament and New Testament saints. And so if you believe those saints are true, you should believe that Muhammad is true. And so the whole thing there in that argument would depend on whether or not the Old and New Testament actually would point to or allow for Muhammad or not. And that's the only real proof that is offered, except for the Quran itself is regarded as such a miraculous work that the only way to explain it is if God was in fact on Muhammad's side and inspiring him as he wrote. But there's no miracles. And so what's interesting is that the Quran and Muhammad affirm that miracles were done through previous prophets. The next quote comes from Britannica about this. It says, concerning Islam, as vindication of the truth of their mission, God often vests them, such as Abraham, Noah, Moses, Jesus, with miracles. God often vests such men with miracles to vindicate the truth of their mission. Abraham was saved from fire, according to the Quran. Noah from the flood. Moses from the Pharaoh. Not only was Jesus born from a virgin, but according to the Quran, and this is a separate matter that we need to discuss in another study, God also saved Jesus from crucifixion. According to Britannica.com, also, Islam, Muhammad had no miracles except for the Quran. So while they affirm the miracles of other prophets in the Old Testament and supernatural works which vindicated the truth of those prophets' missions, Muhammad is not given any miracles. In fact, the Quran says this as well. If we look at N.J. Dawood, who writes an introduction to his translation of the Quran into English, he says Muhammad disclaimed power to perform miracles, although he firmly believed that he was the messenger of God sent forth to confirm previous scriptures. And so let's read some passages from the Quran on this. According to one section of the Quran, the believers ask, why has no sign been sent down to him by his Lord? But you are only to give warning. Every nation has its mentor. So Muhammad doesn't have signs, he just gives warning. He just tells people to believe without any kind of corroboration in the form of miracles, at least. Another quote from the Quran says, some say it is but a medley of dreams, others he has invented it himself, and yet others he is a poet. Let him show us some sign, as did the apostles in days gone by. And so, again, there's notification in the Quran that he didn't perform any miracles, that Muhammad did not. Another passage from the Quran states, they say, why does he not bring forth a sign from his Lord? Have they not been given sufficient proof in previous scriptures? So the response is, previous scriptures should prove Muhammad. That's it. And of course that becomes a question of whether or not previous scriptures actually do confirm Muhammad or not, or refute him. But this gives us some idea about Muhammad and Islam and its time frame, and particularly it's important that Islam has to affirm the reliability of the Old Testament and the New Testament. So we're going to stop there, actually, having covered Islam. We're going to move forward in the next video series to talk about Shinto. We're going to talk about Sikhism. We're going to talk about Babism and Baha'i, and also some modern movements like New Age, and also sort of neo-paganism and those kinds of revivals that we see today in the next couple of videos. So I'm going to stop the video here, and we'll come back in just a moment.